Well, last weekend on Business Weekend, we ran an exclusive interview with the Chief Executive of Australia's anti-money laundering agency, AUSTRAC. That's Brendan Thomas. He talked about new laws for lawyers and real estate agents to establish that their clients are not laundering money. Have a listen.
Real estate's a great example where we're not only dealing with the proceeds of Australian crime, but Australia is an attractive location for international criminals, not only to launder and wash money, but to store their wealth. So what money launderers often are trying to do is to make illegitimate money look legitimate. But what they also want to do is store that illegitimate wealth somewhere where that value can be maintained. Australian real estate holds its value pretty well, as you know. And buying property with illicit money is a great way to store your wealth.
The new laws also prohibit lawyers, real estate agents and others from tipping off their clients that they're being investigated by authorities, including AUSTRAC. But not everybody is convinced this is the right way to go. Former Queensland Premier Campbell Newman is one of them and joins me now. Campbell, always great to chat to you. Just explain where you have problems. Most people would say, look, money laundering is bad. We should try and crack down on that in any way that we can. What is your problem with these new proposed laws?
Well, Ross, I want to make it very clear, of course, that I think we should be doing what we can to stop money laundering and people funding terrorism. But this isn't the way to do it. Indeed, the new laws are a sledgehammer to a walnut. Worse, they're like iron filings in the gearbox of the economy. If you'll just indulge me for a moment, and if the viewers will just bear with me, if I could just read something. And this is from the Attorney General's Department, May 2024. Sort of information and discussion paper on these new laws. Try this one. This is a direct quote. For example, Veronica and Josh, a couple in their mid-30s, are looking to purchase a dog grooming company in Seaside. After finding the perfect business, Coda and friends, Veronica and Josh seek assistance from Emma, a lawyer at Legally Yours, to assist with the legal aspects of the business acquisition. Before starting work for Veronica and Josh, Emma follows the standard procedures for customer identity and risk checks in Legally Yours' anti-money laundering counter-terrorism financing program. Emma requests a certified copy of Veronica's and Josh's driver's licences in order to verify their identities. She asks Veronica and Josh what they do for a living and what attracted them to this particular business. After recording and evaluating this information that's been provided, Emma is satisfied that Veronica and Josh are who they say they claim to be and do not raise any concerns about whether they are purchasing the dog grooming business for illegitimate purposes. I could go on. This is from the government's own paperwork. And I ask any politician who might be watching this show, Ross, is that what the Parliament had in mind? That I'm buying a dog grooming business and my lawyer or my accountant is having to do that? I'm sorry, mate. This is regulatory overkill, and there are better ways that should be being employed to go after the real criminals.
Okay, so the issue of the dog grooming business actually strikes a chord with me. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's a tattoo parlour, a dog grooming business, whether it's a money transfer business overseas. It seems to me this is about illegal funds entering into the legitimate business practices in Australia. Now, we know from last week there's somewhere between 13 or 12 and $13 billion worth of drug deals every year that have to be laundered. So it's inevitable it'll go somewhere. My point to you is if you don't do it that way, how do you do it to ensure that that illegal money is not entering the legitimate business scene?
Well, Ross, you're talking to the guy who, back over 10 years ago, drove the bikies out of Queensland. And the bikies here were the main people involved in the production and distribution of ice. And when we did that, the crime stats showed very significant reductions in assaults and burglaries, etc., armed hold-ups. And my point is we were able to drive them out of the state. Now, at the time, we put in place some very tough laws that were criticised, but frankly, those laws weren't required. What was required was political will and pressure on the police service to actually go after the criminals and to also put pressure on the Crime and Corruption Commission, who have in Queensland extraordinary powers to go after organised crime, which they were not using, by the way. and the police and the CCC worked together very effectively. And for a period of time, the bikies were driven out of business in this state. Now, what happened then was, after we were thrown out of office, the political pressure wasn't there anymore, and they came back. Now, why am I saying this? Well, my position is this. Generally, there is criminal intelligence out there held by state police, the AFP and other bodies. They know who the real bad guys are. They know who they really should be going after. And this is just a grab for more power. I believe that if they really want to sort of keep track of what's going on, that really the secret here is to actually conduct surveillance of the banking network. In this day and age, if AUSTRAC had not just this $10,000 sort of limit that's currently there, if they actually had access to all transactions and then used serious computing power and AI, they very quickly, cross-checking with people they know are involved in criminal networks, build up a picture of what's going on, and they would build up the intelligence they need. The problem here, Ross, is they're making everybody involved in legitimate business, they're making them comply with bureaucratic procedures. They're also making lawyers and accountants and real estate agents end up as people who are having to inform, essentially become dobbers. I mean, this sort of stuff would never have got up 40 or 50 years ago in Australia. That's how far we've come towards a state of mind where we believe that ongoing surveillance and a requirement for everyday businesses and professional firms to suddenly become part of the apparatus of law enforcement. I mean, it's pretty stark, actually. These are extraordinary laws, and there hasn't been enough debate before they were put into practice.
Okay, then go back to the root cause of the need for the money laundering, which is the consumption of drugs at $12 to $13 billion a year. If you're able to reduce that, you would reduce the amount of money that needs to be laundered. If you actually had, say, illegal tobacco, which has gone, has cost the government $7 billion a year simply because it's been driven underground. So what's happened in many cases is that other things which otherwise might have been above the surface, money going through casinos or money going through, sort of typical tobacconists, now being driven underground is part of the problem why it's been driven into the hands of crime.
Well, look, I think you've got some really good points there, and let's just pick some of those apart. Firstly, this whole thing about illegal tobacco. In the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen heightened excise on tobacco. Legitimate products have gone through the roof in terms of their pricing. That spawned a huge black market in illicit tobacco. We're then seeing a massive turf war, particularly in Victoria, with the torching of tobacconists. We then hear, police ministers and premiers and, senior officials thundering darkly about the tough new laws and we're arresting people and all this stuff. But they actually created the problem, because they've put the price of legitimate products up too high and they've created this huge black market, and then they've seen a drop in actual excise. They've been complaining. Actually, it's been in the media recently. They're seeing receipts dropping. This has happened before in history, in Western history. It happened with smuggling down in Devon and Cornwall back hundreds of years ago. And I forget the name of the British PM, but it was sensible enough and enlightened. When he dropped the level of excise applying to various products that were being smuggled in, suddenly smuggling activities dropped dramatically overnight and revenues went up. But another aspect of this is the crackdown on what's going on in casinos. And we're seeing from reports, say, in the Daily Telegraph, that there are suggestions there's quite a significant increase in illegal casinos operating in Sydney because of the surveillance and the crackdown on the legitimate outlets.
So one last thing for you, and that is, let's go back to Brendan Thomas, shall we? Because you talked about the accountants and lawyers, whether there's too many laws there, but really, in many cases, they're helping, either innocently or not, to facilitate this. Have a listen.
Shelf companies that look like they're doing one thing but might actually be a front for money launderers. Organised criminals need professional enablers to help them do that. They need lawyers, they need accountants, they need trust and company service providers to give them the advice to be able to do those things. Sometimes we see those professionals acting in conjunction with organised crime, sometimes we see them just naive as to what's happening and not really asking the right questions.
Surely, Campbell Newman, it's not too much to ask an accountant, a lawyer or a real estate agent to say, well, hey, do you know who your client actually is and where they got their money from?
Well, I'll put it like this, Ross. The good guys and gals, the law-abiding citizens, they will dutifully follow these new crazy over-the-top laws. The bad guys, the criminal lawyers who are actively involved in the criminal enterprises, they will continue to do criminal things. When I was Premier, and I've got to be careful about what I can say here, I think I'm safe enough ground here. When I was Premier and fighting the bikies, as I alluded to before, I was told by the police and the Crime and Corruption Commission about a number of different lawyers in southeast Queensland who are actively involved in criminal motorcycle gangs, not as legitimate legal advisors providing the sort of defence that every citizen of Australia is afforded, but actually people involved, as the head of AUSTRAC was just saying, in the criminal enterprises themselves. Well, this is my point. We know in general who these people are. We know the gangs. We know who their advisors are. Those things can be ascertained. And it's a bit of a case of the 80-20 rule. A huge impact could be made by going after the people that the law enforcement authorities already know about. But what they're doing here, Ross, is they're making business more difficult for everyone. And the idea, and that was, again, that quote at the beginning, the idea that you would have to go through that sort of palaver to buy a dog grooming business just shows you how insane these laws are. And I again say, I hope if there are any politicians watching this, you should have a better look at what's going on with these law enforcement agencies. They are taking the proverbial by requiring everyone to go through this. I predict these laws ultimately are going to be unworkable.
I'll tell you what, Campbell Newman, good to have you on the program today, and many thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ross.